Welcome to the Advertising Forum, where we interview industry experts across the advertising industry. Today's episode is sponsored by DoubleVerify. Today, we have Brook Minto, Global Director of Global Media at Haleon.
Brook, we're excited to have you with us today. We're going to discuss the importance of trust and transparency for top-tier global brands like Haleon. Are you ready to hop right in?
Absolutely. Jeremy and AdTech God, thank you ever so much for having me today. And look forward to chatting more.
Thanks so much, Brook. We're stoked to have you here. So to hit it with question number one, how do you see trust and transparency shaping a more transparent ecosystem for advertisers and their partners?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the actual crux of it is it's going to be critical to how we operate. The reality of this, though, I think it's always been critical, but the relationship has been confusing in regards to who is ultimately responsible. Is it the advertisers? Is it the agencies? Is it the vendors? And the reality, I think, probably in some regards, us as advertisers have kind of been burying their heads in the sand a little bit in regards to what we need to do. But I think we're going to see some fundamental changes. Ultimately, I think if we look at it just in 2024, we've seen, a huge amount of change. We've seen areas in regards to things like MFA coming to the fore, which was discussed in 2023 and 2022, but really wasn't a known force. So we're going to have a lot of areas, a lot of questions in regards to publishers and DSPs and SSPs to be more transparent in regards to what they're buying and what their inventory looks like. I think we're going to see a lot of a big change in regards to advertisers like us taking a big step up to have stronger direct relationships with people like DoubleVerify. We're doing a lot of work, and we'll see a lot of interest in owning contracts directly with the tech providers to get better access to data to enhance our transparency. And I think the trust and the transparency component will be a huge area that we start to operate with agencies, and that will become really the crux of the agency model moving forward. I think other areas we've seen, and we will see kind of big changes, is we haven't really yet got to the bottom of the disbanding of GARM and the bits we saw this year, and what this means for the universal framework and the areas of like transparency and the brand safety floor, which was a universal, contextual, and widely understood view on transparency and everything around brand safety. But how does that come to light, and what do we need to do in there? Though I think we're going to see some big changes in regards to the antitrust trial and our friends at Google and what that means, irrespective of what way it goes. I think we're going to start to see hopefully a more transparent ecosystem at Google, whether that's things like seats on AdX or better transparency into their kind of supply and what that looks like. And I think the other part of where transparency is going to be key and it's going to be fundamental for what we've tried to do this year, especially for advertisers, the explosion in AI, both from creative in regards to things like deepfakes and what that means and how we can utilize things like DoubleVerify to help us kind of understand what that is and how we can kind of move away from that if we need to. I think the big changes in transparency will be around activation, because AI isn't going to go away, and the whether it's Amazon, whether it's Meta, whether it's Google, whether it's Microsoft, are all very much moving to AI-driven activation. I think this could obviously have some pitfalls in regards to supply transparency, but I think more importantly as well, what it will also enable us to do is be able to use AI to solve the problems of today for a better tomorrow. But fundamentally, going through all of those pieces is transparency is going to be the key that runs through all of it.
Brook, that was amazing for our first response to the first question. As a brand marketer, within the healthcare space specifically, safety's got to be beyond important for your brands, for your products. Yeah. Where do you seek education on the consistent tech improvements that are taking place within our space?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's something that's always continually evolving. And to be honest with you, we have a very multifaceted approach. So we rely heavily on the brilliant team at Publicis who kind of help us kind of shape the strategy. We rely on them to bring kind of things like best-in-class recommendations, either by new technology partners, education that we need to deliver, both the stuff that they see in the local markets. I sit in the global team, so I'm not always as close to the local market activational needs. So it really becomes critical that we have kind of a continual dialogue around what we need to do. There's obviously proactive projects that we need to do and come to light with, whether that be building new products, looking at new areas and new advancements that we start to see coming to light. We rely heavily on the brilliant team at people like DoubleVerify, who we work with continually. We need to be able to ensure that they understand what we're trying to do. They, in part, then help us build products. They help us educate the teams, how we can evolve and what we need to do, and take feedback and have a continual soundboard. But I think most important probably in the last bit is that really what we have to do is we listen a lot to our local markets. We have a lot of cross-discipline teams that look after things like insights and analytics and measurement and procurement. And these teams really help us continually evolving, because what we have to do is we have to understand what their needs are, what the technology can deliver, and therefore how we can then put the two together, because it becomes pointless us just driving tech improvements if it doesn't drive demonstrable business outcomes. So we first understand the outcomes, listen to the markets, work with the agencies and the partners, and then join them all together. And that becomes as hopefully as seamless as possible.
Brook, you mentioned, transparency a lot. You mentioned AI. Obviously, the DV Transparency Center is trying to help demystify this black box. They're trying to clear up some of these misconceptions. In your opinion, outside of the ones that you've listed, are there any other hot topics that you as a brand and brand advertisers should be eager to learn about or educate themselves on?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think the biggest question, I guess the biggest bits that we come back with from a lot of what our local markets will say, or a lot of stuff we're trying to do, is really to try and find, I guess, non-biased, informative content that was relatable to the fields that we're working within. So a lot of the fields, a lot of the areas we look at, is a lot of the questions we get is how can we start to future-proof to expected changes within the industry? So as an example, we know through this year, we're going to an election year, right? So how can we as a brand market, or how can I empower my brand marketing teams and my agencies to adapt the plans to ensure that we have transparency, we have brand safety, we have brand suitability, and there's a common understanding of what we should be planning for, which then becomes critical. Again, on the AI point, it's how do we not just blanket PMAX as an example, or Performance Plus or Advantage Plus across everything for doing AI for the sake of it. But how do we use that to enhance the business outcomes we want to do? And how can we find non-biased and then also information directly from a third party that sees it across everything in order to drive more effective outcomes for what we want to do? And then I think critically important as well is what we're seeing a lot of is measurement starting to become cool again. I think, going back a couple of years, measurement was always the geeky guys. It was the traders. It was the geeky guys and girls who were sat there in the dashboards trying to pull all the numbers and put everything together. But the reality is now it's becoming kind of everyone's problem, because we get a lot of questions around how do I measure my brand activity? But how do I start to bring areas such as attention? How do I look at sustainability? How do I start demonstrating effective outcomes? How do I show the right amount of attention and the right amount of sustainability? I know it gives effectiveness, but how do I start to basically deliver that? And more importantly, how do I measure that? And that's something that what we try to do is kind of use that kind of, the Transparency Center and other areas as well to bring that together to give a non-biased and informed plethora of information that we can take and then literally scale that as much as possible to drive effective outcomes.
Brook, you had mentioned a few minutes ago that you work with Publicis. Obviously, transparency is really important with your tech partners. But how do you work with your tech partners, and how do you enhance brand safety to ensure, the right type of security and the right type of performance that you're looking for?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So what we do is we do a lot of work with kind of the publicists and internally with our teams to look at things like we have a lot of strategic documents that goes into how we want to buy, where we want to buy, what things like brand suitability should look like, what things like brand safety should look like, etc. That really gives a view in regards to things like IVT or fraud or the type of categories that we want to go ahead and work within. Some of the brand safety issues or some of the brand safety, decisions, if you like, are made at a local market level because they're obviously closer to that market. They understand where they want to be and what they want to do. But then also, as well as what we try and look after from a global perspective, is to be to try and drive buying in the most transparent way as possible. So what we do is we have a framework that looks at a multitude of things. It could be as simply as owning the contract. So we work with publicists to buy through the SSPs or the DSPs or the tech providers that we have a contract with. What that enables us to do is to be able to understand the data that sits within it and be able to make informed decisions a lot quicker. In regards to what we should be doing and how we should be working. That was critical for us to understand things like MFA and also to understand things like IVT or fraud or some of the issues that have happened over the last year or so. And then also when we work with our kind of some of our tech providers, we then work with them on the basis that we have quite an informed decision in regards to how we should be buying. So if we are working, for instance, in a programmatic environment, what we also want to do is ensure that we are going, as an example, through the least amount of hops as possible, or through the least amount of resellers possible, to get as close to the publisher as possible, therefore minimizing the risk, and to go ahead and reduce things like tech tax, put more money back into the publishers of where we want to be spending, and to eliminate as much waste as possible.
Great. What other actions should the industry continue to do to suss out some of the bad actors in the space?
That's a great question. I could probably spend hours on this. I think it comes down to probably a couple of things, right? I think it really comes down to, first, an advertiser has to understand and has to have a clear plan of what they want to do. So brand safety and brand suitability requirements, you have to build those for your brand, and they're the critical component, and so are the core KPIs you want to do. So a brand safety perspective, where is it you want to be? What is it you want to do? Brand suitability can look at anything from context. It can look at anything from how you want to be kind of delivered across the digital ecosystem. But having that overarching brand suitability and brand safety framework is critical, because that can then be delivered with the agency, also the tech providers are using, and then it has to be understood throughout the business. I think the other key areas that I'm getting at, sussing out the bad guys, is making informed investment decisions into the tech providers that deliver value. So as I was saying before, a basic understanding of things like supply path as an example. How many SSPs are you using? Can you cut down the touch points? Because everyone's saying every touch point is just a multiplier of risk. Can we get as close to the publisher as you can to make him? So you're gonna obviously drive more money into the publishers. You're going to waste less money, and you're going to be more effective. I think owning things like the contracts from an advertiser perspective, that you can then have your agency and or your advertiser then go ahead and advertise across, is critical to get better access to the data to make more informed decisions. I think there's lots of conversations now around curation or inclusion or exclusion lists being the norm. So adjusting that strategy and then being able to measure that becomes critical. So being able to have a curated inclusion list, or an inclusion list, but the key then is obviously the size, right? There's no point building 300,000 publishers in an inclusion list. You want to make it as small as possible, but to be, of course, as valuable as possible to you, it has to be ones that meet a quality threshold. I think some of the other areas that we worked out over the last couple of years is a cost versus value kind of approach. Is cheap always the way to go? I think a lot of advertisers will push their agencies and push the SSPs, the DSPs to buy cheap. I'm telling you now, paying a cent for premium inventory and trying to drive a premium audience is in all probability going to get you rubbish. So balancing out value versus cost, and really consider paying more in order to get better value or better quality, I think becomes a key component. And then as an industry, we need to get better probably at demanding transparency to make more informed decisions. This could come from ensuring things like log level data are coming from your tech providers, whether that be the big DSPs or the SSPs that you're working with, so you can start to make more informed decisions to drive to more effective outcomes, and to take out the things like the MFAs or the fraudulent websites, or the misinformation sites that you're seeing, or the alarm clock apps that you see in your inventory, or the Russian apps, or whatever you want to do to help kind of remove those. And then lastly but not leastly is working with partners like Double Verify and the agency, to have a framework and be flexible enough to evolve, because MFA today, it'll be something else tomorrow, there'll be something else going on in the geopolitical environment. So you need to have that flexibility in order to adapt and move, and then invest where the value is.
Brook, this has truly been enlightening hearing your perspective. Thank you so much. This wraps up our episode from our transparency series, brought to you by Double Verify. Thank you, Double Verify. A big thank you, Brook. Thank you for taking the time to just give us all of these amazing knowledge nuggets. Thank you to our audience, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much. Pleasure's all mine.
Thank you, sir.